Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Let's get back to work. We are a little late and we will try to optimize our time. And we will have, at the end of our event, we will have a small party between us that will be offered in the hall. I hope you have all eaten very well. Those that are not from Rio de Janeiro, you could feel the summer out of season. And please put your cell phones on silent mode. And getting back to our work, I invite Dr. Bruno Arruda from the Ministry of Foreign Trade, and he's going to talk about strategies for decarbonization and measurements for the lowering in CO2 emission. Well, good afternoon to everyone. I am the first one right after lunch. I know everyone is probably a little sleepy because of lunch, and hopefully you've all had coffee. And I'd like to thank for the invitation to be here, our hosts, FGV, the Brazilian Marine, BNDES, and not only the invitation to participate here, to speak, but also to listen. Our ministry has an immense value in this sector, this group of potentialities and needs that compose our national interests. So it's really up to us as a ministry defend our public interests and assure our government as much as possible to be contemplated in the decisions that are made abroad. And we have a negotiation that's ongoing in the IMA. And my idea here is to present to you a little bit of the negotiation that we have been doing at IMA about this theme of energy transition at sea, and show you a little bit of our priorities and focus on our negotiations in coordination with many different actors and players. And I see many of our fellows here. It is great to see you all again. I understand that the presentations done yesterday provided a solid panorama on the nature of the 2023 strategy of IMA. So I'm not going to take very long on that description. But very simply, these strategies have established goals, and we have instruments to reach these goals that are basically three. They're operational measurements, technical measures, such as the increase of energy efficiency, and measurements that are related to the fuels. The first measurements, we do have incentives that are the so-called short-term measurements. And we are now at a point of our negotiation with these three elements. So we're expecting for three results that must probably be presented September this year until April next year. And those would be the measurements about fuels that will be used for the lowering of the CO2 emission of maritime transportation, and also the economic measurements that will be incentivized, all of three of them, operational, economic, and the adoption of sustainable fuels. And finally, we will also have to deal with a way to articulate these short-term measurements with the medium and long-term ones. It would be a way to look for a synergy between them. So they have to sort of go well at the simultaneously. They have to work in a complementary way. Well, so the goals related to fuels, in a very simplified way, our idea is to accelerate the adoption of the sustainable alternatives. And that is obviously the point of our measurement focused on green fuels. And we have communicated that this is not a spontaneous transition. I think Professor Alexander has said that this is a transition that must happen quickly and with no natural alternative in terms of the bunker, something that is cheap and available. So it's really a transition that needs to be encouraged. And that's why we are treating these measures in two dimensions. One of them is the regulatory one. And this should probably emerge from the negotiations at IMA. And we think that this is a trajectory for the decrease of the use for maritime. And we have to establish really a limit for these fuels by unit of energy that was generated for that fuel. And maybe at the end of this year, these vessels, these ships will have to show how much they have used, knowing if they had reached the limit or not. That is something that we are still working on. And it must be supported by an economic measurement, which would be the idea is to decrease the price gap between current fuels and alternative fuels that we are searching. Well, obviously that these economic measurements, they want to encourage all technologies on the lowering of carbon dioxide emission. And there is a current limit for the amount of reductions that we can have with operational measurements and technical measurements of energy efficiency. And in this universe, our actions are divided in two. And the first one is really in the design of these measurements to make sure that they will be favorable to the Brazilian interests. And the second point of focus is a discussion between the eligibility options for these fuels, and we want to position Brazil in the supply chain that will probably come up during this transition. Well, about the measurements is also needed. We have to be clear that Brazil is constantly looking for coherence in its international relations. Brazil has now become a solid and trustworthy partner, and Brazil supports and is fully in agreement with the Paris Agreement. And we are aware that there are impacts on climate change, and they have been perceived all over the world. In Brazil, clearly, and with a lot of intensity. We had a few tropical cyclones, and I just heard today that the cabotage navigation was affected by climate change. So this has been a less controversial subject, and we see the different players that are involved in this transition, that there is an acceptance of that reality and a willing to work with it. So this commitment of Brazil with the Paris Agreement has become more intense as Brazil has offered to host the COP30 in the city of Belém. So this is really a signal that Brazil has shown the world on the agreement on this theme. So we are committed to a quick and compatible transition in the maritime sector as well. And to Brazil, we have two factors here because this transition has to be quick, but it also has to be safe. We cannot expose our crews, our passengers, our coastlines, and it has to be fair. And by fair, I mean we understand that the measures that were adopted cannot affect disproportionately some countries more than others because of their geographical location, and especially the development. And we understand that this message is that there cannot be a contradiction between the fight against global warming and poverty. Um, and these are goals that have to be compatible. And for these reasons, we understood that some of the measures that are being looked over are more adequate than others. Some of the measures that we believe to be adequate that have a momentum in the media, and probably heard about it, is of the alleged universal tax in the maritime sector. We have studies that indicate that this sort of tax would have a distortive and important effect. So when I'm charging a fee on every emission, you are generating an overprice, and this price will then be input in freight price, and then the product, and then the final consumer. So different types of products will have more or less application of these fees. So the price will be diluted, and for example, for cars, and but products that have less aggregated value, for example, agricultural products and even food, they are more sensitive, price sensitive. So they get to the final consumer with higher prices than it would be ideally. So, but we consider that we have two impacts here from this effect that are not desired and that do affect developing countries, that will affect the production chain of these countries. We have cases of countries that have very fragile structures, and these countries that have internal weak infrastructure, they will suffer a lot more with these measurements. And the other thing that concerns us is about food certainty. So the price of food would be elevated, and we know that many developing countries, they import food from us, and we would then aggravate the problem of food certainty all over the world. So we have been trying to communicate our position, our measures at IMA, and we have tried to look for balance to articulate a well-designed strategy with the reduction of emissions, establishing goals that are progressively harder to achieve. And so ships will have to lower their emissions every year, and associated to these goals, an economic measure that will be easy to understand. It's just like a fine for those that do not comply with the limits. They will have to pay a fine for the exceeding emissions. So in our opinion, that would be enough to stimulate this transition without necessarily punishing countries that export raw material and commodities and that are far from their producing centers. So these are our main guidelines to these measures. Now about fuels, the definition for the parameters to really check the sustainability of fuels. This is a very long discussion that has to mature yet. So, but in a simplified way, it is about examining and understanding what are the fuels that check all the boxes to be accepted at IMA. So, what would those conditions be? We have evaluated the number of emissions. Okay, so I just received the 5 minute morning. So, the idea will be to quantify the emission of fuels, and we are constantly highlighting the importance of understanding this number of emissions until other sustainability elements, like, for example, social impacts that are associated to it and other environmental information. And up to now, IMA have been through a group for correspondence, and its last formation, it had the coordination of Marcelo Moreira and also the European Union and Japan. And this group has presented a few guidelines that have been accepted, but we understood that this is an ongoing work, and we should probably divide into a more technical approach. And the most tangible issue here would be the quantification of emission of each fuel, and we'll also have the more political aspect to, for example, how do we consider the social sustainability aspects and also environmental aspects. So just like I said, this is a long-lasting discussion, and we have assured that this negotiation and this debate will actually be done. So the discussion of alternative fuels that will prevail as a bunker alternative, but we understand that in the absence of a natural substitute, we have to maintain all of the alternatives in a balanced way and transmitting very clearly the value of each one of them. So we know that biofuels have a very important role in the maritime scenario, but we know that other fuels have to be encouraged as well. So we have to be open to work with all of these technological alternatives, also because of our differentials that were mentioned here. We have offshore wind, land, soil, water, so we can pretty much actor in any technological route. And with the previous presentations, we were able to see that even clearer. And this discussion is not restricted to IMA only. In the Ministry of Foreign Trade, with other bodies of the Brazilian government, we also have this look on other spheres where they're having this discussion. For example, the commercial sphere, we are constantly trying to prevent commercial measures to be used indefinitely with commercial arguments only. So we know that there are countries that can use subsidies a lot more than others. And to Brazil, it's important to have this transition allow the inclusion of actors that don't have that sort of space nowadays. So we want to act more inclusively as we can. And the measures that have been drawn during the elaboration of these technical guidelines about fuels will always have these efforts to calibrate the measures and the checking of some areas of these vessels that have to have specific treatment and other particular situations as well. And we will always look to really defend our positions, but it's important to send some messages. And one of the messages that I heard today is that there will be an energy transition. That is a consensus. and that we must be part of it. It's impossible to not do that for the whole country. So we have to be ready for what's coming with this energy transition. And when I say ready, I mean that we're going to have risks, and the best way to anticipate risks is to always be advanced with the technology, with decarbonization, and always trying to refine our operational and technical practices and improve them. In Brazil, is in a privileged position. We do possess all of the conditions to lead. For example, I don't want to seem euphemist. I don't know if that'd be the word, but we do have the conditions to encourage to make this transition happen.
And we have to be ready to harness the opportunity. Yesterday, the people from the BNDES says that this could be a milestone for the construction of public policies for the mobilization of private sector in the alignment of our efforts. I believe that was the expression she used. In the alignment of resources and with our common objective that we have as countries. And I want to support this call my made by Professor Luciana Costa, and we are in an important movement, receiving many names, and we saw here the names: Green Revolution, Fifth Industrial Revolution, uh, Industrial Revolution 4.1. So that will be a redefinition of standards, and this redefinition is ongoing. And with this redefinition, we will redefine the opportunities in terms of creation of jobs and income and the other international insertion. And I want to end with this call that let's use our leverage, let's understand this moment in the way that it should be understood, with serenity and being prudent and aware of the opportunities that is ahead of us. And we have to use our advantages and invest in the technologies and that we can reinforce the scientific efforts and we can occupy all these spaces that we have in front of us, the scientific, industrial, and political arenas, so we can realize this potential that Brazil has to benefit concretely, and to benefit and transfer these benefits to its populations and others, the countries as well. So we can have the new so-called industrial revolution in a revolution that can improve the the world as it is, especially in the sea. Thank you. Thank you very much, Bruno Arruda, for your presentation. We start now the panel on foreign trade. As a moderator, I would like to invite Dr. Franciele Carvalho. Dr. Franciele is going to introduce the speakers, and I'm going to invite them now. Mr. Anderson, Rodrigo Vermelho, and Paulo Squares. Mr. Jan Hansen Anderson, please. He's not here. He's online. Oh, okay, he's online. Okay, the moderator, Dr. Franciele Carvalho. Good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to thank for the invitation of MBNDS and FGV and the organizers and many other organizers involved. One second. just let me introduce myself. My name is Franciele Carvalho. I'm associate researcher in maritime transportation in International Council on Clean Transportation, and I'm going to moderate this panel about foreign trade. We would have a keynote speaker that would start the presentation, and then we would follow with our speakers here on stage. But because of the technical difficulties in internet, our keynote speaker is not online yet. So I will start with the presentation of our panel and making a brief introduction. So when you talk about foreign trade and aligning with this maritime transportation, we have to understand the commercial profile and the profile of the maritime transportation. When you look at the exports of the main Brazilian products, we see commodities with low value added. That's the case of soybeans and iron ore and many other oil that it doesn't have a low value, but it is inside our export portfolio. And the main consumer markets of these Brazilian products are in Asia. It's basically China. And we have to understand two things associated with this transportation. The increase of cost for distant markets can have a value in the competitiveness of the Brazilian products. And the second is that we have to think about energy density when you think about fuels. Because we need autonomy for these vessels to leave Brazil and reach their destination carrying our products. And out of the messages that we heard in these 2 days of event, the first is that the alternative fuels are going to be important. So we have energy density associated with Brazilian foreign trade, analyzing the main exported products, and also the energy efficiency and devices of saving economy, as they call. That is the case of wind-assisted propulsion and other technologies employed in the existing ships to reduce the energy consumption. So in the panel today, we're going to see a few cases of big Brazilian companies that export the main products of the national exports agenda, telling us a little bit of their experience in this path to decarbonization, how they are planning and how they are preparing. So we can start here with the first speaker today. I'm going to call Rodrigo Vermelho from Vale with a brief introduction. Rodrigo is a shipping engineer, graduated by the University of São Paulo. He has more than 20 years in experience in the international maritime business. He's been at Vale for 14 years and he's the current director of shipping. And he's going to talk to us about Vale and the experience of Vale in this trajectory of decarbonization in the export of its products. Thank you, Franciele, for the introduction. I wanted to start congratulating FGV, the Brazilian Navy, and BNDES and the other organizers for this high-level seminar. I want to greet my fellow panelists, Paulo and Franciele, and to thank the opportunity that was given to Vale to tell you a little bit of what we are doing in the trajectory of decarbonization in the navigation in the eco shipping, that is our research and development program. I want to start telling our purpose that we are here to improve the life and transform the future together. And this is a picture of the Amazon forest that Vale is one of the biggest protector. And I like this picture because there is a small vessel that I consider as important as the vessel that transport our ore, and we believe that mining is essential for the worldwide development, and we serve the society when we generate prosperity and we share this with everyone. We really believe that. And in a broader context of climate change, Vale has pledged a lot of commitments here. First, about the scope 1 and the scope 2, we have a goal of 33% by 2030 and net emissions zero by 2050. And we can see an image of an electric truck. And we are doing a lot of work in our mines, in our railways about that. And about energy transition, the scope 2, we have the goals of 100% of renewable energy in the world. And this month, we just reached an important milestone of 100% of renewable electric energy in Brazil. This was publicized, and we are very proud of that. We also have the goal to reforest 1,500 hectares by 2030. And we have a scope 3, Wherein the shipping to reduce 15% by 2035. To contextualize, the navigation and the shipping represent 3% of all the emissions of Scope 3. 97% are emissions from the metallurgy, and Vale has worked in new products, both in high iron content ore and the beef fat that is patented by Vale to use the most modern uh, technologies for the steel industry. In the context of shipping, it's very important to understand the challenge that Vale has to be distant from the consumer markets, especially compared to the competitors. We are three times more distant from Asia than our competitors. This was always a challenge to our competitiveness, and that's why innovation was always present in the history of Vale. This is a way to overcome this challenge and keep ourselves competitive. Both in the ports and in the shipping, Vale was pioneering the introduction of Cape-size vessels in the 70s. We have distribution centers spread all over the world, and this makes us compete in the same level with our competitors. Now talking about the vessels, most recently we adopted the Valimex. The Valimex are the large vessels totally dedicated, the mining vessels dedicated that were introduced in 2010. And a plan to explain to you, these are ships that incorporate many operational efficiency aspects. Because we have a peculiar operation, we need to bring this operational knowledge inside the vessel. So these are vessels that carry only iron ore, and they support high levels of loads and high and broad hatchets to flow the loads, the cargo, and it brings an energy efficiency that the second generation we could improve 15% in energy efficiency in a short period. In only 7 years, between one generation and the other, we improved 15%, incorporating all the technology that were available. And this was a project that was thought of 10 years ago, and at the time, we had designed a compartment here for alternative fuels. The rules for alternative fuels usage was not ready yet, but we were envisioning the future use of these fuels. However, with all these generations of super efficient vessels, we know that the challenge is more than that. And we are always making this clear. The ambitions is in the revised strategy of GHG. With this ambition to have net emissions equal zero by 2050, even with efficient vessels, this wouldn't be possible. And we established a research and development program by Eco Shipping in partnership with the Valley Technological Institute that has a partnership with many academias, and to map and accelerate the green technologies, and important to identify the opportunities of competitiveness. We want to solve the problem of energy transition, but we want to identify opportunities to improve our business. So the first step is to draw a route of decarbonization, and this route starts with the economies of scale, large vessels, and the second step, energy efficiency, and the third one is on leverage for the fourth step. That energy efficiency reduce the energy consumption, and you can use an alternative fuel that cannot be 100% green or decarbonized, but with time, with the improvements and other methods and other routes, this fuel is going to be decarbonized. And you have innovative and disruptive solutions that we can follow and change the course of what we are doing. How do we work? We work through partnerships and connections with innovation ecosystems, both in Brazil and outside of Brazil. We had contact with more than 2,000 startups, and we have partnerships with amateurs and ship owners, labs in Brazil and in other countries, and that allows us to contact the developing technologies, and through a methodology of projects, we are going to filter them and advancing the conceptual and detailed projects to find the pilot projects, and then we have the monitoring of these results for a possible scaling of these to larger fleets. Maybe the most iconic examples of the pilot projects are the rotative sails. This is almost 5 years, and it went throughout this trajectory. We had a technological review for the identification of many technologies that use the winds, and then computational and numeric calculations. We had 3D modelings of our ports, so these vessels could not impact our operation. And then with all that being accepted, we ordered the equipment we installed in the vessel that is already operating since 2021, almost 3 years of data collection and learning with this new technology. The technology is important, but it's not the only one that we are testing. What is the methodology that we developed? We are working in these three pillars. So we mapped the new technologies. Here you can see, besides the rotation of sails, the air lubrication, and the many types of inks and hydrogen dynamics device, and do the pilot projects. And with the pilot, we learn about the technology. We develop solutions to the type of vessels that we need, and we also learn about the cost of these processes. And in all of these vessels, we installed the high frequency data collection systems. We saw that energy transition is related to digitization, so this is important. These high frequency data collection systems allows us to monitor in real time the performance of these vessels with these technologies, and can validate the benefits that we predicted in labs in computational models. What do we do with these results? We insert in a long-term model that we developed inside the company that works in the horizon of 30 years. We run different scenarios, and we can establish the parameters of the ports, the types of vessels, the portfolio of technology, the goals of reduction that we can reach, and we run the models and the scenarios. Of course, there is no single answer when you would work with these models. We have to run with many different scenarios in order for you to have a sensitivity of what makes difference and what matters. And this model feeds back what are the next steps of the research, and where it's worthwhile to invest our efforts and resources in technology that is being used by the model that makes a difference in the 30-year period to reach the goals that are being put to. Not only it guides the research and the next steps, but it also guides the investment strategies. And I'm bringing here the new generation of Guaíba Max ships. This is a generation that's going to incorporate the best technologies that we are testing. Many of these technologies that I showed in previous slides. It is a generation of ships that are going to be dual fuel, so they are going to use conventional bunker and methanol that are going to be used in this ship. But not only that, we have the concern to have options and flexibility. Since the past, we designed a ship that can use LNG. This ship is going to use methanol and bunker, but it is designed since its beginning to a future retrofit of ammonia and LNG in case it is necessary. This flexibility allows us to make concrete actions and start acting now. So this ship is not only 14% more efficient than the previous generation, that in short term, in 6 years, we could make a significant leap, but the use of green fuel, we can reduce 90% of the emissions. And this is really significant as well. Final remarks that I wanted to bring to you. Energy transition was incorporated in the strategy of Vale in the products that the company is producing, that it wants to offer a solution for steel industry and the way that it is producing. Our commitment is to support the IMO and the maritime industry and to achieve these ambitions. And the way that we are doing is that we believe that this is not a problem that's going to be solved by only one player. We believe in the cooperation, and this is a problem for everyone, and we have to work like this. And to end this beautiful picture of the new ship in the port of Tubarão with the sails without any impact in our operations. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodrigo, for your presentation, showing us how innovation plays a very important role on decarbonization of maritime transportation and showing that companies, even before knowing which fuel is most appropriate, has been getting ready in the case of multi-fuel ships. And that shows a lot about the commitment of Vale with energy transition. I have been in this transition team, and I see that you guys are participating constantly in discussions and fostering these discussions. And we know that the first ones that start planning and investing in technologies will have higher predictability and fewer costs in the future. Thank you. Now, I'd like to call our second panelist, Mr. Paulo. He's the chief of energy in Suzano. He's an economist by the University of Campinas. He has over 20 years of experience in the electricity sector in Brazil, and he works with energy transition in high scale electricity mills. Thank you, Franciale. It's a huge pleasure to be here with you representing Suzano. Suzano is now 100 years old, but we consider to be a 100-year-old startup. We have been in the cellulose and paper business and of bio business. That's something I'd like to present to you. Franciale said I have 20 years of experience in the electricity sector, and I have a 2-day experience in logistics. So, and this has been an amazing program, and I was able to realize that many of the routes that Suzano is inserted can be improved. So I'd like to thank the Brazilian Marine, FGV, and BNDES for this opportunity to be speaking to you. Now, a little bit about Suzano. We have just become 100 years old, and we are a leader in the production of cellulose in the world. And we plan every day 1.2 trees of eucalyptus in Brazil. And we have 1.2 million acres in degraded areas. So Suzano is according with degraded areas, but 1.1 million square kilometers of well-preserved forests. So if we look back in terms of celluloses, we will have our new project in Mato Grosso do Sul at 13.5 million tons of cellulose to be exported. We are in the paper and packaging sector as well. And we're also in the consumer goods sector. We have just acquired the toilet paper brand Neve, and we are constantly looking for new businesses. We're involved in new businesses. Lignina, that is a product for wood. It's a great product to be used in the rubber industry. Fluff, for example, that is used for those pet diapers. And we have also started a tissue to develop a tissue based on cellulose, and we have contracts with H&M, Nike for the production of a tissue fiber from cellulose, where we will spend 80% less water on the production process. So it's important to say that sustainability is our strategy. Our purpose is to renew life through the trees. So that's just a little bit of our vision and what we call renewability. That's to treat things in a renewable way. And in the strategic vision, I'd like to call for your attention for the two main points there, that from our strategy point of view of being a leader in sustainability and have an expansion into new markets for our biomass. So it's important regarding this theme that we're talking. What are we doing related to maritime? So we export a lot, and next year we'll start exporting even more. We participate on the global impact in ocean businesses. We're very operative on this theme. And we have partners with the largest innovation hubs in the world in Israel, Brazil, China, to build solutions in the maritime logistics of Suzano. All of our new COEs, our long-term COEs, are already imposing gradual measures of construction of ships that can operate by Suzano from non-fossil fuels, renewable fuels. And we have tested recently on a vessel that was operating UCMO that's used oil methyl ester that we have tested. And we've had recently, with the logic that was explained by Rodrigo, to increase the scale of these ships. And we have over 72 tons of breakbulk celluloses. So this is just one of the first measures that we're doing in this change path, really, inside of our maritime logistics. It's important to understand Vale's vision, because Vale early adopted these measures, and we are very, we're very willing to do that. So this image shows us basically in a relation between energy intensity and the distance between the loading points. We can see here in blue that have low energy density with smaller distances. You have the scooter there that's very intuitive, but here we are basically on the other side, and in long distances and high energy intensity. In the green part of this chart, we see what we have used. So this is a little bit of what Suzano considers to be ideal bio and synthetic fuels that might be incorporated in the logistics, the maritime logistics of Suzano. And that is a little orientative from us. And we have the change of fuels inside our maritime logistics. I'd also like to agree a little something into Suzano's view. And as we have mentioned, we've seen mentioned these past 2 days, the thing with Brazilian ethanol. And here I can say that the sector of paper and cellulose in Brazil is intensive in biogenic CO2. In terms of volume, we are the largest producers of hydrogenic CO2, biogenic, excuse me. So we have this logic. We've had conversations with the main players of the market, so that within the biogenic CO2 logic, when it's binded with low in low hydrogen, we can then produce ethanol. So Suzano has a high volume of biogenic CO2. We have a very well-known ESG reputation in climate positive position. We have water permits and renewable energy to start, and utilities from pulp mills, and also relationship with key players, and that includes potential off takers, and that allows us to have this exchange and to be future producers of e-methanol in Brazil. And this is a little bit of what we wanted to show you. And just to finish with my last minute, my final minute, I think some of the things that I have learned in this seminar is that the players will always need flexibility. There is if we'll have many alternative fuels that will be in the maritime logistics, and there's our opportunity. And I think another opportunity that we have just seen the lecture of the Ministry of Foreign Trades, and we see the regulation of IMO to allow the Brazilian industry to participate in the in international market that will not be affected by protectionist measures, and also maybe Brazil still needs to do an inventory of green options for the maritime sector. So there are many options, and we have to build this portfolio in industrial units, really. And when we're talking about paper and cellulose, we think that there's nothing to do with it, but it does. This building of this inventory is very relevant for institutions such as the BNDES. And I think that maybe a final measurement is to learn and get together public sector, private sector, and academic sector to have a new pro-alcohol program for the biofuels in a long-term journey. So that is it. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you, Paulo. Another example showing that even with the many products that we talk about export in Brazil, these companies are starting to invest and putting themselves ahead of producers for alternative biofuels, and showing that Brazil has many opportunities and that can be used in the decarbonization of maritime transportation. I really liked your presentation, and it will be a good thing for our next lecture. That's Mr. Jan Anderson that will be with us online. I will introduce him to you in English. He is a foreign speaker. Let me just wait for him to connect. Hi, Jan. Can you hear us? So,
the Business Development Director at DNV and also the Regional Director for Maritime Organization. He has over 30 years of experience in the maritime industry. He has joined DNV in 2005, and in 2010 he moved to the DNV Maritime, and since then he has been engaged with a lot of projects and studies on alternative fuels, new technologies for ships, and offshore unities. Mr. Ian, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francel, and thank you to FGV for organizing this seminar and also for inviting DNV and myself to present. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but hopefully I can explain what DNV does and how we look at the future of maritime decarbonization. So also sorry that I have to do this in English, but hopefully you will get my message. So if you look at what is occurring in the maritime industry, DNV means that there is no time to waste towards 2030. This decade is a decisive decade for shipping. And the reason is, of course, that even from the IMO perspective and the UN, we are entering an era of global boiling. Shipping is a vital industry to global economy, and it does account for somewhat over 2% of global greenhouse gas emission. So it means that any actions that we take to reduce emission will have an impact on the global climate change. We have talked about the energy transition in shipping for a while, but its urgency is increasing. We need to take some actions now to make this transformation. So that is why we say this is the decisive decade for shipping, because it really sets the stage for how we can move the industry forward. Sorry. So DNV, for those who are not aware of DNV, we have been in business for 160 years, since 1864. Our purpose is still the same. It's safeguarding life, property, and the environment. And we are the leading classification society for shipping and offshore units, and we are the trusted advisor. Our vision is still to be a trusted voice to tackle the global transformation, and this includes the transition of maritime energy usage. So just to recap, from the IMO, which is the global regulator of international shipping, they strengthen the strategy and the ambition to reduce the greenhouse gas emission by shipping by reduced by 100% by 2050 or about there. But that also then includes certain checkpoints in 2030 and 2040. That is also on the way to reduce the greenhouse gas emission to net zero by 2050. So this means we need to start a trajectory now in order to meet these levels of ambition that the IMO and the global community has set towards the maritime industry. So if we're also looking at other concerns with the industry, the greening of the maritime industry also results that we have to pay attention to other key concerns for the shipping community. We do see that there are a number of safety incidents on the rise. In 2022, we saw an increase for the second year in a row. We also are very much aware that the complexity with new fuels, new technology on board our ships, it will require new skills and enhanced training for all our seafarers and everyone that are engaged in the shipping, both onshore and offshore. So we have estimated that by 2050, worldwide, we need another 750,000 seafarers that will need additional training. So that was doubled when the IMO strengthened their greenhouse gas emission last year. So this is definitely going to be also a challenge. We also see that there is a growing cyber threat towards maritime and maritime assets. Of course, something is related just to the more technology-driven ships with more connectivity, but also there are, of course, unrest in the world that also affect shipping that also can result in increased focus on using shipping assets as a way to create damage to the industry. So if you look at where we are today, we can see the fuel technology transition is underway, but it started briefly, but a real transition is yet to start. We do see that there are an order book of new ships that is built with ability to use some of the lower carbon and alternative fuels, but still 99% of the world fleet are still using fossil fuels today. So this transition and the change to new fuels and the supply of these fuels need to be accelerated. So DNV has, in the last few years, developed a maritime forecast towards 2050. In the last report we issued in 2023, we estimated that shipping would need about 30 to 40% of the global carbon neutral fuel supply by 2030 in order to meet the checkpoints set by the IMO. That is quite a challenge, or can be a challenge for the industry, as now we are using less than 1% of the carbon neutral fuel. So what we mapped out was to look at all the different production facilities worldwide that is engaged in developing carbon neutral fuels, anything from biodiesel, biomethanol, electric fuels, ammonia, and fuels that could be used in the maritime industry. Of course, these plants are not exclusively focused on the maritime use, rather the opposite. Many of them will go to other transportation industries like aviation and other industries. So how can then shipping be able to secure the needed supply of this carbon neutral fuel by 2030? That will be a big challenge. So how can we meet even the 2030 goals? Well, what we see from our forecast and analysis is that the energy efficiency measures are still a key topic to reach the 2030 goals. And I think Rodrigo from Vale also showed their journey as well. And the focus is really on, improving the operational efficiency of shipping, technical measures like energy saving devices, wind assisted propulsion, and other energy improvements in the design and systems on board a vessel is key, as well as having a focus on making shipping as an integrated logistics chain more efficient to move cargo along the whole supply chain. This is also quite a number of savings that can be achieved with that. So this has to be done in parallel and focus, as well as we improve the supply of alternative fuel to meet the long-term goals of the shipping community. We also see that digital tools and more data-driven decision-making as the ships are more connected is also important to understand the operational performance of ships and assets. And then as we are able to measure and monitor the performance, we are also then able to make the changes in the performance and build on the experience that we have. So collaboration and better tools across the shipping community is critical. So we always try to say that collaboration is the best new fuel in order to meet the greenhouse gas transition in shipping. So just to sum up where we think the industry are and what we need to focus on, this is the decided decade. The action we do now towards 2030 sets the future decarbonization trajectory. Hence, there is really no time to waste. We have to take actions both for existing vessels, but also focus on the uptake of new ships with new technologies and flexibility to use some of these new fuels when they become available where the ships operate and to the ports we operate. As you say, the alternative fuels will be in scarce supply. Will be competition for it. The price will also be increased. So focus on energy efficiency is a key, because that's really a win-win situation. If you can improve efficiency and reduce the energy usage, you will also save the use of these more expensive new fuels that will come in the next few decades. The other is, of course, that we need the trusted data from our ships, from our suppliers, and this has to be secure as well to ensure that we have full control of it, but still being able to have transparency with the industry. But this will also then drive the global transformation and support the collaboration that we needed. So, and lastly, but not least, we will need to focus on the safety and the seafarer skill as we have more complex ships and more complex operations in the future. So with that, I will stop my presentation, and we'll be happy to take any questions and follow up from the panelists and Franciel. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ian, for your presentation.
So the last presentation that we had today recovered the IMO goals and touched on important points for the goals to be met. And we brought the energy efficiency, the operational measures that are related to the design of the ships, and also the operations of these vessels, the importance of the fuels as the core of this energy transition and the maritime transportation, and it touched a very important point on the safety and the training of seafarers, because the energy transition is going to demand technology and new people to operate in these new technologies. And before thanking the speakers, I don't think we'll have time for questions, but I want to make a brief introduction in the beginning of my presentation. For those who don't know me, I am a chemical engineer. I am a doctor in energy planning and a researcher in the International Council on Clean Transportation. And I work developing applied research to help the sector, the public sector, in the decision-making process. So these are research focused on elucidating the stakeholders and the regulators and the government in the better design and formatting of these policies, and all of these focusing on the reduction of emissions in the transportation sector, and also looking not only at the climate change but the air pollution. This is so important for human health. And we developed a PhD thesis for alternative fuels, and personally I'm very happy to see this event happening, because in 2017 I started researching the alternative fuels for maritime transportation when only a few people were talking about it, and to see what was being considered a landmark for the energy transition in the sector makes me really happy and honored to be part of this process. So thank you again for the invitation. Thank you the panelists and the organization of the event. Thank you. Thank you, the members of the panels. We are going to have a group picture now. Thank you. Now, continuing our seminar, we invite Mr. Carlos Miller, president of Contimaf, for his address about safety and training of seafarers in the energy transition scenario. Gostei. O Ian falou seafarer. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to greet Congresswoman Sally Jornan, representative of the state legislature, and extend to all the presidents. I want to thank Admiral Wilkes for the invitation to make his address to something that is important to the seafarers. And I want to thank BNDES and FGV and the Brazilian Navy for having the concern to make this event with such distinguished guests. The energy transition is really important to the seafarers. I'm going to get a link with my fellow member of the boards of the Merchant Navy Fund, Alberto Cabucci, I think he's present, and he said that the company that he chairs went through the last energy transition in 1800s when they adopted what we have as fuels nowadays in the ships. And Arnaldo, we were present in this occasion, the seafarers. And we were present in all the energy transitions before that happens on board of the ships. The IMO usually says that we are on the edge of the fourth revolution of the propulsion, and the seafarers always had an essential role in this transition. We don't know yet if the next transition there will be seafarers on board. This is an uncertainty. But we have no doubts that we will be on board and it will be work for that. The seafarers have no doubt of the necessity to have an energy transition and that we can continue with an hospitable world. And we are going to work hard on that. I'm going to talk about CONTIMAF, the confederation that I preside, represents workers in waterway, in air transportation, in the fishing industry, and in the ports. There are 6 federations in the country, 250 unions, 770,000 workers, and it gathers seafarers, port workers, the river workers, and the fishermen, and the workers of the air sector, and a small portion of workers in tourism transportation. Internationally, we are associated with ITF, that is the International Transportation Workers Federation. We have a tripartite member of the ILO of seafarers, and we assist Brazil's presentation at IMO. So we help this presentation keeping merchant marine officers there to support this activity. I'm going to talk about the safety and the training of seafarers in the energy transition scenario. And I will start by saying that the 3 main concerns that worldwide is true in the minds of seafarers is about safety, the training, and the employment resulting from this transition. The safety we can mention because new fuels that so far were not used in the maritime sector, and the initial evaluations indicate high risks. Regarding ammonia, that it has been frequently mentioned here, We have great concerns with the toxicity and the difficulty to disperse the gas. Ammonia, in a recent analysis of 2022 of EMSA, the European Maritime Safety Authority or agency, identified that the risk for ammonia to be used as a fuel is not tolerable for a passenger cruise ship. And our question is, if it is not tolerable for a passenger ship, of course, because of the number of people on board, why would it be acceptable for a cargo ship where there would be only crew to use this type of fuels? So we have a rejection to the risk. And we don't understand so far that ammonia can be a viable solution while there are seafarers on board of the ships. When you talk about these risks and these concerns, we mentioned the necessity of a fair maritime transition. And what would be a fair transition? The, in, the International Labor Organization that is to make economy greener in a way that is as fair as inclusive as possible for everyone involved, creating labor opportunities that are dignant and not leaving anyone behind. Not leave anyone behind because of the lack of the continuity of the employment or the lack of access and training to the new technologies that are going to be adopted. So, because of that, internationally, we start to see some initiatives and some commitments aiming at assuring a fair transition in the maritime sector. And with our international work, we are part of that. I'm going to mention here the Maritime Just Transition Task Force that was launched in COP26 in Glasgow in 2021. It had as participants the ICS, that the International Ship Owner Chamber, the ITF, the Maritime Workers, the Global Pact of United Nations, and the International Labour Organization and IMO. And the task force of maritime just transition is to make sure the response of the worldwide maritime industry to the climate emergency is to put the seafarers in the center of the discussion, supported by the principles of fair transition established worldwide. What I said in the beginning defined in the ILO. In the next year, in 2022, we launched a publication mapping the maritime just transition for seafarers. This study counted on the collaboration of classifying authorities as DNV and Lloyd Hester from the ship owners' chambers of ICS and ITF. And the main detection, there were 2022, we hadn't defined in the ILO what was defined nowadays. So nobody should question that. Whatever is the model of transition, there will be high demands of training of hundreds of thousands of seafarers all over the world. The seafarers will be, again, key and essential for us to be successful in the maritime transition, whatever is the model that is going to be adopted. In 2023, it was mentioned here the strategy of IMO for the reduction of greenhouse gases emissions in the ships. What was not mentioned here is the 3 points in this strategy that talks about the training and the work of the seafarers. The first one that I highlight is that it recognizes the importance of approaching the human elements, including the impact of the seafarers on the seafarers and other professionals in the safe implementation of the strategies that were defined at IMO. Recognizing the impact that this strategy will have on the seafarers and other sea professionals, and requesting that the organization IMO can make a new assessment of its instruments, conventions, and guidelines and standards to define how this transition is going to be made. And lastly, the organization, the IMO, can develop, will be able to develop a specific training program inside the STCW to support the reduction of the emissions, and this essentially through the qualification of the seafarers. I'm going to talk to you about the actions, the union actions to promote the maritime fair transition. We think it is essential here in Brazil the uh, mobilization of the role of Petrobras. The oil and gas responds to more than 70% of all the cargo in cabotage. 50% of everything that is transported is the oil that leaves the platform to the continent. Petrobras has a significant role. Unfortunately, more than 100 ships are from foreign flags chartered by the state-owned company that are not exactly under the control of the Brazilian state because they are not Brazilian flag ships and not even Petrobras. These ships are going to follow the models that are going to be adopted by the Northern Hemisphere.
So, on this sense, we expect for Petrobras to have big actions defending interest points to Brazil and not only follow whatever is going on in the North Hemisphere. Other actions we started including clauses foreseeing the action of these two parts on energy transition. We have included a resolution in the Seafarers Conference trying to bring Brazil to a more protagonism role to the Brazilian seafarers, even because we represent more than 80% of the seafarers in Latin America. And in this sense, our union organization has a modern training center at the Avenue Presidente Vargas, and it played an important role to keep the technology here in Brazil updated. And back then, when the industry adopted the dynamic positioning system, the Brazilian seafarer that wanted to make that course, they would have to travel to Norway or Scotland and spend about 15,000 pounds to then come back to Brazil and start working here. And that was, and 15 years ago, when we brought to Brazil these simulators, Brazilian people started having the option with much lower costs, the possibility to train here. And we are now the second country in the world in number of dynamic positioning operators. And we're losing only to the US with a much more significant acting than Brazil. If we hadn't done that, we have no doubt that these job positions would be filled by workers from other countries that would have had training. An important data that I have to show you is the seafarer formation programs in Brazil. They come from the development fund of professional maritime teaching, and they have been contingenced in the past 5 years in a heavy way. And the values that are used are not in accordance to the authorities that we have. I see here our future officers participating in this lecture. You can count on us to protect you and protect your job. And we have to acknowledge Minister Mercadante yesterday And when he said that he committed to unblock this amount so we can invest in training centers, the modernization of laboratories, and so that we can maintain an excellence pattern in the formation of our officers in Brazil. And a result of this lack of resources is really a decrease in the formation of officers in a moment where we see right now, currently in the world, that we will need more sea officers, seafarers. And an idea of Contimafi that was included in our plan. And again, I'd like to thank Admiral Wilkes for his sensitivity. I will make this presentation available to you, but we have included these two paragraphs in the proposal for the Energy Transition at Sea National Plan. Without the human element, without the seafarers, Brazil will not succeed in its energy transition. And call for your attention because Brazil currently has a national maritime policies that are out of date. It's completely outdated from last century, and we have been trying to update these policies, but it is still under analysis, and it's very important for Brazil to have a national maritime policy that is updated with the challenges that we are facing in contemplating energy transition. This is our organization. Thank you all very much, and I'm sorry for speaking a little bit ahead of my time, but I believe that the information I brought to you are important to complement the great lectures that we have seen in these two past days. Thank you very much. Thank you, President Carlos Miller, for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, we will start our last panel with the theme Barriers of Energy Transition at Sea. I'd like to invite Mr. Luis Fernando Visano, the Executive Vice President of ABAC. As a panelist, Mr. Shankar, Ms. Luciana Costa, Mr. Tiago Balhau, that will participate remotely, Mr. Rafael Feldman, and Luiz Gustavo Silva de Oliveira. The presidents of this cultural center, please. And just a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, that at the end of this panel, we will still have the speech of Admiral Wilkes, and here I am wearing black and white to pay him a tribute because of the team of Botafogo. Without due respect on the Admiral, after the end of this panel, we will have a small party, and you're all invited. And with a word, Mr. Luis Fernando Visano. Excuse me. Good afternoon, everyone. We have many Highlanders here because after 2 days with these panels, it is with great satisfaction to see this place packed with the students from the graduation school of the Marine, and it's very important for us to see you all here and knowing that you're all very much interested on this topic. We also had the opportunity to see many presentations, and I think that we were very happy in this organization because right now we're talking about the frontiers of energy transition, which I believe it's sort of a good closure topic to our seminar. And in this segment, we have this closure, like the classifier society, on how they're doing, and the fuel suppliers and fuel consumers, funders of these energy transition. And Carlos Miller has just discussed the fund of maritime teaching. And we do have an interesting parcel that goes to this fund. And we have another parcel that goes to the Science and Technology Fund, just like the representative from FINEP has spoken. So there is money there to do what we have to, but we're not using it properly. And before passing the word to our colleague that will talk about the corridors, I'd like to use the picture for the opening of our panel. Many ships are standing there. Where's energy efficiency there? We're losing money on these ships because there's so much to be aggregated there. So I would like to pass the floor to Shankar. He comes from ABS Houston Sustainability Center. He has great experience in the formation of logistic green corridors, and he will be the keynote of our panel and to talk to us about your experience on ABS, of how, as a developer of green shipping corridors for the maritime industry. Thank you very much.
I want to hear English again. So I appreciate all of you staying back. I know it's 2 days of a lot of discussion. With respect to green shipping corridors, just a minor correction. We are not developers of green shipping corridors, we are facilitators. So we're trying to bring these different stakeholders together and see how we can go about decarbonizing a very, very difficult to abate industry. So can you switch the slide? Oh, there it is. Apologies. Okay, so let me start with a little bit of history of how we got this this space. So in 2019 or 20, there was the Clydebank Declaration, where about 24 countries came together and decided, now that we have the IMO's initial GHG strategy, how do we go about operationalizing this into something that is tangible? And based on that, a green shipping corridor was a concept that was considered as something of value. And based on that Clydebank Declaration, the Department of State in the US came up with the green shipping corridor framework. They were like, okay, this is a very complex topic. How do we go about creating a framework to think about these problems? So who should be the stakeholders? What are the targets? How do we convert something that is complex as maritime decarbonization into something that is more tangible? That is, because the maritime industry, if you think about it, is very is global. It is also heavily separated in the sense you have multiple ports, you have too many players. So just saying maritime decarbonization actually makes the problem more complex. So we need to give the industry a framework to think about it. So the green shipping corridor as a concept, what it does is lets you think about the problem in terms of stakeholders and a certain trade route. So for example, let's take Brazil. What could be the alternative fuels that you want to focus on? Biofuels, for example. Brazil's got a natural advantage on that. What are the shipping routes you want to focus on? You know, like take a specific route that has got huge carbon reduction possibilities. So you would choose those. What are the vessels you want to focus on? So based on that, you will create a core partnership, and that will be your core partner that will come together and sign what's called an MOU to start developing a green shipping corridor. So this is a high-level vision. This looks very cartoonish, but it's for a reason. So this infographic makes you think about the problem in terms of two ports. What you have right now is a quote-unquote brown corridor that requires decarbonization, and then over a period of time, you start taking specific actions. You start off small, you have very small targets initially. You try to decarbonize one specific route, focusing on one specific commodity that is being transported, and then over a period of time, you further start expanding. And the idea is, what is a brown corridor right now? Over a period of time, by 2050, sometime before that becomes a green corridor, and eventually, all corridors are green corridors because it's all alternative fuels at that point. And possibly in 2050, you wouldn't even be using the term alternative fuels, it'll just be fuels. So what are the foundational elements? So first of all, cross-value chain collaboration. You got to have owners, operators, you got to have ports on both ends. You need to have a fuel producer. You got to have a logistical case. For example, a certain commodity that's getting transported between port A and port B, that particular company wants to reduce its scope 3 emissions, so you have a logistical / business case, and then you of course need policy and regulatory support. So in the case of those countries that signed up for the Clydebank Declaration, it's a governmental move to support these initiatives. In the case of Brazil, I haven't heard of specific green corridor government-directed initiatives, but then there have been some examples of announcements made at an MOU level. So some of the discussions that we've had in the past, where the government has got some funds, maybe a green shipping corridor is something they can possibly look at a very small scale to begin with, and then further expanding. So these are some of the announced green shipping corridors. Just a note of caution, this is an expanding list, and as we speak, this could have changed. But one thing that needs to be focused on is that a lot of announcements are made. You have MOUs that are signed, but as we speak, there are no operational green shipping corridors. There's a lot of corridors where pre-feasibility and feasibility assessments have been made, but then a real-world project that leads to an operationalization of a green corridor is yet to occur. But then there's quite a few that are at a very mature stage, and you would probably start seeing results in the next year or two. So what does ABS do in green shipping corridor development? We play multiple roles. We not only bring these different stakeholders together, help them unpack a very technical problem, and make it easy for the stakeholders to come together on the same page. And also as like a neutral arbiter or third party in this discussion, we also provide a platform for easy data sharing, because for all you know, in these massive value chain based initiatives, you will have competitors playing different roles at different stages. So there is also there are cases where a certain owner or operator will not want to give off their data. So ABS plays that role of bringing all of these stakeholders together and creating an environment where those conversations can occur. So that's where we play the facilitator role. Apart from that, we also play a very technical role. We can also do corridor optimization, simulation. We can help with calculating total cost of ownership for the owners. We can also do port-side infrastructure development related optimization. So we can play both the role of a facilitator / technical support, for the development of a green shipping corridor. So these are the different simulations across life cycle and value chain that we've done. So as you notice here, this happens at various levels. So it happens at the corridor level, where it's more on the macro side, bringing all the different stakeholders together, modeling all these stakeholders aggregately, and then you go down to the fleet level and the port level, and then if you're interested, further down to the vessel level, so multi-physics simulation. So we can operate technically at various levels, and depending on where we are in the discussion with respect to that specific green shipping corridor, we can operate at various levels. So this is an example of some of the simulation and fleet operation capabilities that we have. So we can, on a case-by-case, simulate a port facility, a port operation, and then we also can do an optimization model where you get specific port stats on if you're wanting to switch from fuel X to fuel Y, what is the energy demand expected in that corridor, what is the infrastructure development that we think you need to spend on. So there are multiple different key performance indicators that we can actually spit out from these simulations. So this example is for where we did a case-by-case Singapore to Rotterdam green corridor simulation. This is not real data. It is just an example that we're trying to show. We can do the same thing in the case of Brazil. For example, if a bunch of stakeholders come together and they decide port A and port B, we can start developing a green shipping corridor. We can build a case-by-case simulation for them. So what are the key outcomes? Like I said, across the corridor, it would be forecast of cost of operations, aggregately, fuel cost consumption and fuel mix forecast. So that is also an important thing. So you have certain assumptions you make in the optimization model that you expect over a period of time the fuel mix, the future fuel mix, to evolve in a certain way, and that will have impacts on the optimization model. And the evolution of the fuel mix is also a function of how aggressively you want to decarbonize. So you want to go net zero in 2050. Now that's in alignment with typical global requirements. But say, for example, you want to go one step ahead. You want to decarbonize by 2035. So we will take a specific case in, let's take Brazil, take these two ports, understand what the current fuel mix is, how does the fleet look right now, and based on the decarbonization trajectory, what should the future fuel mix look like? And based on that, how should the ports on both ends start focusing on developing their infrastructure? And then also look at currently announced projects for fuels, and then that will also be an input into the optimization model. So for each of these different stakeholders, we will provide specific outcomes that can be of value. So we can work on projects specifically with one of these stakeholders, either the fuel supplier or a port or the cargo owner, or we bring all of them together, and then in an environment of trust, we can work on a corridor-wide simulation study. So just concluding my talk, we have helped bring together at least, I would say, 2 green shipping corridors which are still in the stage of MOU signing, things of that nature in the US, and one in Europe. But because it's still at the stage where only some announcements have been made and some internal studies have been done, we're not presenting those results right now. But in the near future, we should be ready once those green shipping corridors are announced and some kind of operational activity starts. We should be able to provide more conversations and more details about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sankar, for your presentation. Acho que, como a Franciele também fez uma propaganda da sua função.
I also would like to advertise cabotage. That it might seem small, but last year, and in the cabotage, we transported 1.2 million containers between Brazil and the United States, 400,000. So we cannot say it is insignificant. so or neglectable. When we look at Shankar presentation, we saw that the Atlantic coast doesn't have green corridors, and we could think about doing something about it. And I invite Dr. Luciana coming to the stage for the second time as director of BNDES, and she's going to tell us how BNDES can work on this maritime frontier, funding all the projects. That is the role of the development bank to finance the infrastructure. And you, as director of infrastructure, will be able to honor us with your words. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to greet my fellow members of the panel. And I want to greet everyone and thank Admiral Wilkes for the opportunity to present the vision of BNDES in this afternoon. Actually, I would like to start that at BNDES, I am responsible for the Infrastructure and Energy Transition Department. And I want to call your attention to the comparative advantages that Brazil has in this historical window. No other power, no other country inside the G20 has all the advantages combined that Brazil has to reindustrialize itself in green bases. And maritime transportation is critical because the reindustrialization of Brazil in green bases depends on the foreign trade, and 95% of our exports are travel by sea. So the maritime transportation is part of a whole in this strategy of the country. Brazil has a consolidated democracy and away from the war. Here in Latin America, in South America, we are very far from the worldwide conflicts, and this is very important to give stability and security to the capital. We are an investment route because of this stability. Brazil is a major producer of foods. We guarantee our own food security and the food security of the rest of the world, because we are the largest net exporter of foods. United States export more than Brazil, but they also consume more. Our energy resources and mineral resources are larger than any other power nowadays. 88% of our electric matrix is renewable. 48% of our energy matrix is renewable. Brazil is responsible for 5% of the global emissions, but our pattern of emission is totally different from the pattern of emissions of developed countries, even China and India. 50% of our emissions come from deforestation and 25% of land use. Only 18% comes from the energy sector and less than 4% from industrial processes. It is cheaper to decarbonize, controlling deforestation and change the use of land than transforming and substituting all the transportation of oil and gas infrastructure and all the infrastructure of the electric sector. That is an infrastructure that has been built in the last 100 and 150 years, and most of them is already amortized. So in the rest of the world, India, United States, European Union, and China are responsible for 50% of the global emissions, and they need to change the whole energy infrastructure because in their case, in average, in the rest of the world, 75% of the emissions come from energy. And our energy sector, our electric sector, is privileged. It has comparative advantages because it is integrated. We deliver in renewable energy in any location of the country, and we are a huge country with continental dimensions. 13% of the water of the world is here. For 55 of our source is from hydropower. So we managed to produce hydropower in the north, wind and solar power in the Northeast and bring to the Midwest because we have more than 180,000 kilometers of transmission lines. United States do not have that. Europe do not have that. The world is escalating renewable energy as well as transmission lines. And we, in the electric sector, we have a regulatory environment that is stable, that can attract private investment. We just did 3 auctions of transmission lines that will be responsible for more than $50 billion in investments, and we have capital for that. We have the largest biodiversity in the world and the largest rainforest in the world. The biggest forest in the world is in Russia, but the largest rainforest with the biodiversity is here in Brazil. And we have a history of public policies focused on sustainable practices and renewable energy. In the 70s, we chose to build hydropower plants, and BNDES funded that. And then we chose for the alcohol and pro-alcohol and escalated ethanol. And now, and then in the Pro-Infra program, we started funds wind and solar. So the window of opportunity is historical, and our ambition has to be, and we still have the coastline that we have. So we do need to be ambitious. We have to reindustrialize in green bases, and maritime transportation is critical for that. A little bit more about our competitive advantages I would like to add. The critical minerals, along with China, India, Canada, and Australia, Brazil is well positioned from the mineral reserves perspectives and the strong environmental support from the government for these policies. I'm not considering here our potential of oil and gas. The pre-salt has 14 billion equivalents of barrels, and the equatorial margin has 10 to 25 billion barrels of oil equivalents. We still need to do some research there. Our oil is less carbon intensive and super competitive. So the world has to consume less fossil fuels, and we are struggling with that, but we are not going to leave oil so quickly. And our oil displace other oils in the world. Petrobras is going to be responsible for 44% of the offshore oil production by 2040. Now, talking about the decarbonization of the maritime transportation that produces about 3% of the global emissions. At the same time, it is responsible for 80% of the foreign trade. These numbers are really important for us to understand that this transition has to be made with a lot of criteria, because wrong decisions in the decarbonization will impact the economy. And we need to choose routes. The discussion of decarbonization of maritime transportation depends on discussion of technological routes and discussion of taxonomies. What is the European taxonomy is going to recognize, the Brazilian taxonomy is going to recognize as sustainable, as low carbon. The discussion of ethanol is really important. Now, about the possible routes. The routes also has different characteristics depending on the type of transportation. This is a little bit of the goals, objectives of the IMO that were already discussed here, and why that despite this sector represents only 3% of the global emission, why is it so important to discuss? Because if we do not challenge ourselves and to set our goals, we can explode the carbon emission in the maritime transportation. And how do we see that the energy matrix is going to evolve in the maritime sectors by 2050 with a bigger participation of methanol, ammonia, biofuels? Of course, this is only an estimate. Our main challenge here is the shipyards. We need more shipyards in the world to do the retrofit of the fleet and also to produce new vessels. And here in the investment decision, we need capital to fund that. And this is where the bank as the BNDES comes to play. Brazil is positioning itself in this discussion. And Brazil was the first country to adhere to the concept of port decarbonization and maritime decarbonization through the UN Pact. These are data about biofuels. We understand that this is a technological route that is very dear to the country because we have many comparative advantages here. Examples of successful initiatives of Horizon and Cargill. And very quickly, I want to talk about the challenge that we have to modernize our ports and to decentralize not only the challenge of modernization, but decentralization of the ports. Biofuels, our comparative advantage goes beyond the biofuels. This chart is important because Brazil will have the cheapest green hydrogen in Brazil by 2030, and Bloomberg said that, not Brazil. And there are many incentives that we mentioned yesterday about the efforts of BNDES to modernize the ports as well as for the decarbonization of the fleet. That's it. I will provide you this presentation if you need. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Luciana. I believe that for many times she was mentioned here during these 2 days how much the maritime transportation emits in terms of gas. It is a low value. Dr. Luciano said it very well. And I want to congratulate you because if we don't do anything, it's going to get worse. I think this is really important. And throughout these 2 days, we heard here the number of possibilities that the country has to be a protagonist and not a follower of decisions that are going to be taken at IMO. So we need to be able to present an energy matrix, a good energy matrix, and clean energy matrix, as Dr. Luciana said. And I think it was a brilliant presentation. Thank you very much for your words. And now, next I would like to invite, I don't know if he's online, Dr. Tiago Barral, who is the Secretary of Planning and Energy Transition of the Ministry of Mines and Energy, to show us the vision of the Ministry of Mines and Energy in this frontier. And I'm going to invite the topic of our panel, the energy transition frontier. This frontier, we want to be the first step ahead to make this decision and not be following the decisions as I said before. Please, Dr. Thiago, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Luis Fernando. I hope you can hear me well. Before anything, I would want to greet my fellow panelists. And also, I want to thank Admiral Wilkes for the invitation and for making my participation flexible. That was only possible to do this online. Unfortunately, it's not what I would like to do, but this is what fortunately was possible to organize with the support of Admiral Wilkes. And I want to say how impressed I am with the quality of the event, with the high-level debates, and the strategic importance of everything. So on behalf of the Ministry of Mines and Energy, I want to bring a message that is important, in my opinion, that when we think about the decarbonization of the maritime transportation, we have the maritime cargo transportation in Brazil and also the international routes. And I don't have here the numbers of the consumption of fuels divided by cabotage and inland transportation, but there are some data that calls my attention for the first aspects of energy transition strategy in these segments of transportation is the gain of efficiency, systemic efficiency that we can get by the enhancement of the participation of the waterway transportation in our cargo transportation in Brazil. The EPE compiled some data that's out of all the activities of cargo transportation in Brazil, 70% was by roads and only 14% by the waterway. And although it represents 14% of the cargo transportation in Brazil, the waterway transportation represented only 3% of the energy consumption, on the fuels consumption in the cargo transportation matrix in the country. So that shows that we have a potential to gain. Looking at inside of Brazil, it's not enough only to look at the fuels. We have to think about a systemic perspective in this mode of transportation, especially for cargo, as a potential to be increased. When we look at the matrix of fuels of this transportation, this waterway transportation in Brazil in particular, it is basically fuel oil and diesel oil. So we have opportunities. Luciana, as Director Luciana said, Brazil has a potential for sustainable fuels, maybe one of the best potentials in the world, and this is an opportunity for us to enhance the participation of sustainable fuels, not only in the roadway transportation, but also in the waterway transportation, although we do have some challenges. When we look at the global overlook, the International Energy Agency monitors the different segments to be decarbonized so we can reach the carbon neutrality by 2050. And the maritime transportation sector is one of the segments that are not in a proper trajectory to reach neutrality. So from the international agency point of view, there are many efforts that needs to be made, especially in the development of infrastructures and the production of fuels and the trust in the supply chains of these fuels and the transformation of the global fleet. But there is an important point in this scenario of carbon neutrality by 2050. We see that the decarbonization of the maritime transportation
in the decade of the 30s till 40s, with the main advancements in terms of participation of the matrix is by biofuels, with the advancement of the use of ammonia in transportation. So I think that the International Agency of Energy recognizes, acknowledges that the potential for these biofuels to get to 8% of the transportation matrix, maritime transportation matrix until 2050, and that is a country that Brazil may have an important participation and possibility to advance. Now, one of the main barriers for the green corridors and an advancement in this maritime sector, companies have been looking for an approach of reduction of the risks related to these chains with biofuels or flex fuel ships, and that would reduce the risks. So we have been following up on many companies that have adopted this strategy. And so it seems to us that this is a strategy that the private sector has had and that had directed many investments and efforts for innovation and research and development on these technologies. Some monitoring studies of the main advancements of innovation in this segment. There are many of them. I'm not going to get into them, but just a few important numbers. Almost 90% of the projects for research, development, and innovation in energy transition on maritime transportation involve more than one link on the supply chain, in the value chain. So the vessels and infrastructure. So there is an acknowledgement of an approach for a integrated value chain. And these elements isolately are not enough for a successful strategy. And the second number that really caught my attention is that 70% of the mapped projects involve a partnership of at least 2 countries. So that is a very interesting number, and it makes sense watching Dr. Shankar's presentation when he shows the development of green corridors that need a coordination between countries to be able to create these flows. So my message, Luis Fernando, is that Brazil has the opportunity to be a good part of this transformation from the biofuel point of view, but it also has a very important potential to advance in the insertion of Brazil in the green ammonia chain and green methanol chain because of the wide offer for renewable fuels that we have. I'd also like to say that in 2023, during the energy meeting of Brazil on the G20, the Ministry of Mines and Energy, Alexandre Silveiro, has authorized our participation in an international initiative that's called the Clean Energy Marine Hubs, and where we have Brazil, Canada, Norway, Panama, Uruguay, and United Emirates for an interchange of information not only for the decarbonization of the maritime sector, but also for the development of supply chain of sustainable fuels, not only for the decarbonization of maritime transportation, but also for the industry and other segments that will need these sustainable fuels. In Brazil, we see the opportunity of insertion either by our naval industry or by insertion of Brazil in the supply chains of sustainable fuels. And most important of all, it is not up to the government only to establish really the perfect recipe for this transformation. We have done this work of listening to the main port companies and maritime transportation company and the shipyards and many other players so that we can understand these strategies and establish partnerships from them. And I finalize my speech talking about and say that the Ministry of Energy and Mines and Energy is establishing in partnership with the BNDES. Dr. Luciana has been key for this process, and FGV that has also been a good partner of ours for the design of this plan, and we hope that this will make energy transformation, transition, make this real. So thank you very much for the invitation to participate. And you have the floor back, Luis Fernando. Thank you very much. Dr. Tiago, we thank you for your important information from the International Agency of Energy. And I think we have 2 modals that are regulated internationally. That's airways and maritime. So these rules are determined internationally, and we as a country, we have to adapt. Yesterday, the General Secretary of IMO was very clear when he said that IMO regulates the ships, not the states. And now you're pretty much saying the same when you say that not only these ships and the fuels and maritime transformation, we're talking about infrastructure, about the transportations that are needed to maybe be substituted, maybe replaced, and this connection between two countries when we're talking about the corridors that have to have that fuel and that association, or when we look at our domestic transportation, again, I'm talking about cabotage, and we are a continental country. So the transportation from Manaus to Rio Grande that has a route that is huge. So we have to look at this. Why can't we have a green corridor there, for example? And then, Dr. Tiago, my final consideration is that since we do not have a definition on the worldwide fuel definition, maybe there is more than one fuel used worldwide. Can we use a Brazilian fuel that will be able to supply to domestic transportation only? Maybe I'm looking at Dr. Luciana here because it is an important consideration that we have to think, maybe plan, and the document that Admiral Will Keyes has delivered yesterday to the Secretary of IMO. It is very important to define our energy transition for Brazil. So moving on, since you're talking about infrastructure and availability of fuels, I'd like to pass the floor to Dr. Rafael Freudman, that he is the General Manager of Logistics of Petrobras, and he's a huge fuel supplier, not the only one, but a big one here in Brazil. So you have the word. Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a big honor to be in this panel, and I'm happy to be on behalf of Petrobras. It's always an honor. We know that it is a very important player on this process. It's central, and we do not run away from our responsibilities. We're here to work together, and we're very happy to see in these 2 days of event, we have in Brazil so many agents, either public or private, and fosters and unions. Everyone is united with concrete ideas for Brazil. So that's very important. Petrobras is important because of that. But this maritime organization is also very important for everyone, each and every one of us, all players in this market. So I represent the logistics area of Petrobras. It's a very interesting sector. And here's a little bit of our strategic vision and future vision from the maritime sector. Right. So the first, the pillars of our strategies in the refining, transportation, and marketing of oil and gas, we have our main pillars. Petrobras has as a goal to be the best option for its customers. It also has a strategic plan to offer more and more products with low carbon emissions and constantly looking for integrated chain efforts. We are an integrated company. We're there since the production of pre-salt oil, in PSO, and we're delivering refined diesel molecules in the interior side of Mato Grosso into China. So we do have an important value in this chain. Dr. Luciana has talked about the role of Petrobras in an energy transition where oil will be demanded even in the most aggressive scenario of energy transition. We want to be the last barrel of oil to be sold in the world. That's our goal. And here, just a quick panorama of our strategic panorama that are present in our strategic plan. We have goals and ambitions for operational issues, and that's important to keep our final molecule with the smallest carbon footprint possible. The flare emissions and CCUS, we are the largest entity that injects carbon in the world. We also have very clear data on IP and refining, and we have very objective goals towards the reduction of methane. We know that methane is 80 times worse than CO2 in the greenhouse gas, in the greenhouse effect. So it is an important gas to our chain. And here we show a little bit of our history of commitments and to be leaders when we're talking about energy transition. Since 2018, when IMO has established what would be the IMO 2023, we are past that. We have been mapping everything that should be done in our integrated system. And on the right side here, we have some of the news that we're still talking about IMO 2020 with the first step of the non-emission of polluting gases like sulfur. And Petrobras was a very important agent there. And our petroleum, our oil, has low sulfur emissions. So this is an oil that we have entered the market with a very objective and competitive goal, and we're still on this route with new horizons. Now, the integrated chain of Petrobras, we have to offer solutions not only to supply bunker ships, but all of the chain has to be robust regarding these emissions, because a barrel of a bunker produces of diesel. Diesel also has to be competitive in an environment that demands low emissions. So we have to work with an integrated chain with a complete portfolio of robust solutions for these emissions. And we have here a few examples of this. So this year, the podium gasoline, it is a premium product. It's a different sector. And the renewable diesel that's co-processed, that has bio oil in it, where we have the treatment of this product in refineries. So it is a diesel with biodiesel with high quality ingredients. We still have Cap Pro asphalt, and it also has a few strategies here. And we did in 2022 our gas ship because um, we can only deliver such product in these shallow channels, and this ship received the first bunker with Goapin mix of biodiesel 10%, and that was a very successful test. And after that, we still did 2 tests with 24% content. And here's an important news to everyone, that we are preparing till the end of this year the commercial supply of 100% renewable bunkers in Brazilian ports. The port of Santos is an important one, and we will offer commercially this bunker with 100% renewable content to the market. Obviously, our fleet is 100% ours, and we have many important companies interested, and it's a very promising solution for this initial period, and maybe it is a good solution for the green corridor in Brazil, for example, with this bunker with renewable content. And from the beginning of the process and the discussions of IMO back in 2018, Transpetro, I have worked there for 20 years, and they have started their work regarding technological preparation of the ships, and we have about 18 ships with hulls that are painted with special paint that allows the ship to navigate with better efficiency, saving emissions and fuels. We have also implanted a few appendixes to the helix of these ships, and also we have improved the engine controls, and we have an important test using a robot that allows for the hull to be cleaned, and that's one of the most important elements when we're talking about saving fuels and saving and emitting less gases. So this is important to all of us. And finally, we also have at Petrobras our KPIs for these processes. And Petrobras has goals, clear goals. And for our fleet, we're using the KPI for greenhouse gases, that it's basically a mirror of CII from IMO, where each ship has its A, B, C, D, and E categories measured. And we have GE that allows us to look at the fleet as a whole, and in the total amount of my fleet, to understand how much efficiency my fleet has produced. So this is a vision that reinforces some concepts that were mentioned before, where we see the uncertainty of these fuels for the maritime sector, and we know that it's hard to get consensus decisions, robust decisions, economically and technologically, and we see our integrated chain of oil and gas with oil that has low carbon footprint associated to biorefining solutions of bio-oil and biomass originated in a sector that we have already mentioned at this event, that's highly competitive in the ESG. Well, I'm sure that we have a good solution to provide to Brazil and the world, really, and all of the companies that are in this environment to be very successful.
Well, to conclude my presentation, we understand that there is a short-term path that Petrobras is pursuing to make its operation more efficient, and we need to have a low carbon footprint so our barrel produced in the end of the chain is associated with less carbon. We have technological actions regarding the requirements of IMO to our hardwares, our ships, and to stimulate that the vessels in the market can also have this implemented. We have bunker solutions that are ready to offer the market. We know that there are other fuels being discussed, and in the long run, we have the opportunity to work with many players working at the same time as us, and we can associate other solutions that were requested as green hydrogen, ethanol, to compose a robust portfolio of solutions to Brazil. So the work starts right after this event ends, because this was a very rich environment of discussion, and we have to put our hands on and do whatever it takes. The time is now. Thank you. Thank you, Rafael, for your remarks. And it's important to know that Petrobras is already offering this B24 fuel that certainly is going to be interesting for the Brazilian ship owners and also the foreign ship owners, because they are going to contribute to their emissions, to reduce their emissions. And this is important because Brazil is a cargo country. We have a lot of cargo. It was said here that 95% of our exports by sea and are made by foreign ship owners. So we need to be part of that as a whole by offering the bunker B24. That certainly will be a huge advancement. Now I want to offer the floor now to Luis Gustavo so he can tell us how Rio de Janeiro, as it was said in the opening today by the Secretary Felipe Peixoto, we want to hear the initiative of Rio de Janeiro to have a secretary dedicated to the economy of the sea. And Luis Gustavo is assistant of the Energy Secretary of Energy and Economy of the Sea to tell us what the state of Rio is planning for this transition, this energy transition. The floor is yours. Thank you, Luis Fernando. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here participating in this debate. There is a good side and a bad side of being the last one to speak. The good side is that many people already talked about what I was going to say, and I can get all the details. So, and I know that you are paying attention. I don't have any presentation to show, but I'll be standing here. So before saying what the state of Rio is doing, I will reflect on what energy transition is in 3 points, because I think it's important. I participate in many discussions and meetings about energy transition. The companies and organizations, they have created departments of energy transition, but not necessarily we are speaking the same language. We do have a common understanding that the energy transition is a change from one initial stage to a less carbon intensive system. So this definition is okay. It's easy to understand, it's easy to spread, but sometimes it's too simple. And here in the state of Rio, the definition that we have spread is that this transition has to be understood as a reconfiguration of the energy systems in different contexts and territories specified. The energy transition does not take place dissociated from context and territory. So when you talk about reconfiguration, we have to think about the different elements that comprise this energy transition. The companies, the energy systems, the finance institutions. I think Shankar's presentation was very good to show the articulation of different stakeholders that are necessary for us to leverage this energy transition. I like to give an example. The beginning of the 20th century, when it did the transition from the horse driving force to the horsepower of the engines. This is not only the industry. It was the oil and gas industry that did that. The refining and the distribution of fuel that made possible the automobile industry to establish as it did in the 20th century. So we have the concept, when you think about this configuration, that internationally we call public sector. The sectorial occupation. So when we bring the to the reality of energy transition at the sea, how these sectors couple with each other in the shipping industry, the cabotage industry, and different sectors of the users of this system, because we start to ask the interesting questions to make the decision and to make public policies. And this is what we have done in the state of Rio. And my second point is the context and territory. When we specify context and territory, for example, Carlos from Contimaf talked about the direct impacts on the seafarers and the workers. We have to understand that. We have to understand the environmental impacts, but also what are the political contexts and the local infrastructures, the available resources that are going to affect the decisions to choose a project or Petrobras or not. So if we have a cooperation agreement with Petrobras in a hub of CCUS here in Rio, so the context of Rio allowed Petrobras, given the infrastructure and given the experience and the geophysical knowledge that the Petrobras has on Rio's basins, that this project could be identified as priority here. So we have to leaving this territory aside can be very disadvantageous. And here in Rio, we usually say that we have 40 years of offshore experience. We understand that when you talk about green shipping corridors, there are possibilities of many different structures all over the country, but we need to understand to harness our potentialities that are already existing. Nothing against the developments of infrastructure in other places, but Rio has a history, has an installed base, and this is what we advocate inside the state, to use this local infrastructure to give the kickstart. This is what Dr. Luciana said. When we look at the geopolitical scenario, we see a volume of investments in China that is gigantic, in Europe, in the United States. And in Brazil, we don't have this condition to make the same investment. We have fiscal restrictions. We have limited resources. So it is key that we use these potentialities that are local, that are specified in different territories. This is what we are trying to work in the energy transition inside the state of Rio. And my third point is that energy transition is motivated by common understandings, big narratives. Some people don't like this word, narratives, and good common sense. We have the common sense of decarbonizations, most recently the defossilization of the energy systems. We have the common sense of energy security in a world that with a lot of geopolitical tension. We have the common sense of the just and inclusive transition that we have to consider, the environmental and social aspects. But it is an understanding that I always bring in this discussion that is not so common, that I think Carlos already brought. We need to develop capacities of energy transition. Without that, we won't be able to leverage the potential of energy transition. And the development of capacities, of course, the manpower is to think about the strong shipping engineering and technical graduation and technical qualification of seafarers. But we have to develop the capacities of inside the Brazilian states and the states related to the energy transition at the sea. This is critical because from that point on, we make better decisions and more assertive decisions for the energy transition. And in this discussion, somebody talked to me and said, okay, this is the problem of the egg and the chicken. So when we have more market for these technologies, we will develop more manpower. I disagree with that because to me, there is no dichotomy of chicken and egg. Because of the academic knowledge, I am a revolutionary institutionalist, and my evolution theory, it seems that the egg comes first. According to different species, there was a selection, and then the chicken came, so there is no discussion. So this, in the evolution theory, is called process of coevolution. So the development of the capacities needs to co-evolve with the energy transition mechanisms. Another simple example, people talk about energy transition of buildings or digitization of buildings. It's a key factor for energy transition. In the downtown Rio, we can build a building, construct a building, 2 or 3 or 10. All over Rio downtown, we don't have manpower, we don't have suppliers, we won't be able to do it. It's the same thing for the cabotage. When you bring, or the shipyards, we need to understand the development of capacities to leverage the potential of energy transition. A comparison that I like, I heard this in an international seminar, that Brazil is sold as a clean matrix, energy matrix. This is an asset of Brazil, and Brazil needs to leverage that. But we cannot sleep on that, because the amount of investment that is being made in China, Europe, and United States, by 2050, this reality is not going to be true. So there is a window of opportunities that needs to be developed. And the last point, just to conclude, I'll mention what we are doing in the state of Rio. We are drafting the policy study of energy transition, the state policy of energy transition. We had an event here in this very auditorium. There were many 60 contributions for that strategic agenda of energy transition. We are consolidating it in the final draft of this policy to start the discussion with the state legislative power. And there are some strategies that the economy of the sea, the energy transition, the economy of the sea is there as one of the main strategic areas. Because given the relevance that it has, we have a Secretary of Economy of the Sea here. And an example of 2 projects that we integrated, the CCUS along with Petrobras. We have partnership with the Secretary of Environment. So we signed this cooperation agreement to develop this industry. We think this is critical. CCUS, and in the future it can be used as a CO2 source for fuels and something like that. And the working group of offshore wind, because we aim at understanding the capacities of the states to establish the port infrastructure, the cabotage services for this new industry that is starting. And we are also thinking about that. And the second phase of this state policy will be the drafting of specific plans for specific areas. Offshore wind, we are thinking about biogas and biomethane in different areas, and the economy of the sea. And I will invite, I think there are many people here already participate. We are carrying out these discussions inside the State Commission of the Economy of the Sea that is led by the Deputy Secretary Marcio Felipe. And in these discussions, we make these articulations to define the public policies that are going to be more assertive to the state. So I want to invite all of you who don't participate. This is an important space to contribute to the state energy transition policy. Thank you. Thank you, Luis. I think the state of Rio is creating this secretary, is taking a pioneer step, but other cities also created these departments dedicated to this port and maritime subjects. I think this is an initiative that Rio is leading by the states, but it would be interesting having Tiago here participating. I think it would be interesting that every state could have their own department of economy at the sea with the coordination in the federal level to do that. And as a moderator, I was kidding that I'm not a moderator. I'm usually the debater. But the moderator has a key role here. If the debate is warm, he can put more wood in the fire. If it is too hot, he has the obligation to remove wood from the fire. So to wrap up here, I want to pass the floor to Shankar again. And thank you if you could speak in 2 minutes. And to give us everything about, after everything you heard here, what do you see as the main stakeholders involved in a logistic corridor that we can have one here encompassing all of our Atlantic coastline.
Thank you very much for that question. So if I understood your question right, it's about what are the main stakeholders who can play a role in the development of a green shipping corridor in the Atlantic coastline. So one thing that I heard that was really interesting is, for example, the city of Rio seems to have a lot of existing capacity. They have a big port. They also have offshore, industry experience. So the city typically is a very important aspect of the ecosystem of a port, right? So the port and the city are almost one and the same. So there have been initiatives globally. It's once called the C40 Cities Initiative, where the big cities of the world like New York and London, I'm not sure if Rio is a signatory to that C40 Cities initiative, where the cities have come together and said ports are a very important part or aspect, a heartbeat of our economy, and they are looking at developing green shipping corridors between these big cities. And ABS, we have helped them do some analysis, particularly on the LA Long Beach Singapore green shipping corridor. So similarly, I feel a city, some aspect of the city being heavily involved will be very important, which means with the city comes the port, and with the port comes all the ancillary industries that are dependent on the port. And then, and like it was mentioned previously, it need not be a country-to-country green shipping corridor. That was because it was downstream of the Clydebank Declaration, which was done at a country level, versus in the case of Brazil, there could be two ports that take the two major ports, for example, and then they do an analysis of what is the vessel, the fleet look like between Port A and Port B, what are the commodities that fly between these two ports, and is there any advantage for those companies that are transporting their commodity from port A to Port B to decarbonize? So in that case, you would have two ports. You would, of course, have the city on both ends. You would have a company that is invested in decarbonizing, hence wanting to send their commodity with low emissions. And then, of course, you would have the alternative fuels providers like Petrobras, who would automatically, they'll have a natural home for the supply that they create. So all of these initiatives will end up being the off-takers for the supply that is generated by the market. So it will create a virtuous cycle.
Thank you very much. Eu reservei aqui os agradecimentos para o final. Então, eu queria agradecer inicialmente a FGV, ao
BNDES, represented here by Dr. Luciano, for this important debate that we had here, to Admiral Wilkes, that imposed me to be a debater here, and I had the entitled to choose to be the debater. So thank you, Admiral Wilkes. I'm just kidding. And I think we had here an excellent debate, and I really want to thank my colleagues in the panel for the important contribution. I was sure that this would be the best panel of the 2 days, but I saved the best for the last. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you very much, the members of the panel. We are going to have a group picture now. Smile, Thiago, you are going to be in the picture as well. Once again, thank you. You can go back to your seats. Of course, that you are not leaving. We are going to wrap up these 2 days of work, welcoming our guest as Admiral Wilkes Barbosa Jr. Okay, I will be very brief because of the time. Tomorrow is a holiday, and I will start here with a small story with definitions. I will start with definitions.
That through the existence of human civilization and the existence of people and nations, depending on the historic moment, have dedicated to the sea, and they have succeeded in the economical aspect, military, and their operations. Obviously, I don't want to profuse disagreements and remember sad facts, but in 1905, the world had a breaking point to be able to get a language back then. It was the Trafalgar Battle, where the British have beat the French. So that was a key point, really, and that shows that the rules of Royal Navy and maritime traffic was built in that decision. In our case, we depend on this key point. We will either be economically saved or we will be protagonists. Being a protagonist does not mean that we will be adversaries of other countries or competitors, unloyal competitors at IMO. Far from it. We will be contributors of the international community for an energy transition that will allow us to continue living on this planet. Our country has a very big problem with training and formation programs, and I think that is a key problem, really, to all of this narrative. There will not be a ship or anything if we don't have training. And training of seafarers, like it was very well described before, it is important. But if we don't have management of naval engineering and all of its segments, if it's production, IT, we will not have enough conditions to have a strong naval industry. And then SISMUS and volunteering, there's no more space for that. As there's no space for political adventures. So we have to work with compliance. In many segments, we have to understand that very clearly. International laws are there to solve problems. That's simple. And since this maritime area has a very a large strategic matrix, the item of capacity building, it's the one that's prominent. So the gladiator is in the time of Rome, and now everything is changed. That's the reality that we have to understand. It's not be the best or be the worst of our segments in our country or militaries, or it's just that everything has the right time to happen, and that's an important point that I would like to leave as the sum up of all of these two past days, with 53 participations of speakers and international, national institutions, with a lot of efforts from the organizers. And I start by thanking Dr. Christiane. She worked tirelessly for the preparation of this content, and we were constantly dedicating to this content, and it's fundamental for us to be here. And I told her we have to have a political flag as well. And that is why we were recommended to have this approximation with BNDS because of its political strength. As we know, the Ministry of State, and we have federal congressmen, and so this political flag, it's important. In some of the moments, we know that the lectures were heading to interesting results. So we wanted to gather everyone and all of the different opinions, and we have João Lessa. João Lessa is Cristiane's brother-in-law, and I did not know about this, and I understood why they were constantly cahooting with each other. And Commander Matui, Commander Lashevsky, Fernando also, and Lorena, Professor Sergio, that's sitting right here, that helped us building so it was a very strong team. Lavinia from BNDS, very strong team that grew a long time. Bruno Gallardo, and the participation of central organization like BNDS, the Marine, and the invitation for the General Secretary. Obviously, we had the authorization of the Marine Commander. I went to him, and he helped a lot. Petrobras, this morning, for example, Petrobras did a visit on our center, and it was brilliant. And it was very important because it shows that science is by our side. And the insertion of Senator Cachabreu showed us that it is important to have different opinions. So I would like to ask for a round of applause to our organizers. And I almost forgot Cornel Vasquez. He was also very important in this balance. And another point I'd like to mention is that it is very important for Brazil to understand its size, its proportions. That's it. We have a huge country, so we have to be huge. We cannot just think, how are we going to do this? How are we going to make it? So we're the largest world offshore and at IMO, with all due respect, obviously. We have to fight for our opinions. And I always like to make these metaphors with sports metaphors. And we were talking about Spain in the European Soccer Championship. And so this idea that of our size, we have to give them this idea. So Ocean Pact, for example, is the largest one in Brazil. It's the largest one in the world. So that's my message to you, that we have to have motivation right now. And the Brazilian naval industry has this unique opportunity for ship repair, ship maintenance, of dismantling of platforms, and naval building. So it's a wide performance that we have. So we cannot just sit still and wait for everything else to happen. And these pacemakers will not take us anywhere. We have to fight for it. We have to be to establish our rules, and not just now, but as a growing thing throughout the life cycle of a ship, for example. And I'm here saying this as a former commander of the Marine, and the past consortium that we had did not want to create jobs in the world. They were a business, they were a company, they want profits, they have to sell dividends in their own country. And so when we're discussing job positions, it's really a vis-a-vis situation. Our industry has to know from the beginning what is the program, what are the requirements. That's it. And then we will exponentially grow. We want to start at 7%. For example, it's just a random number, and then we will get to 75% next year. But we have to find out how to do that. It's easy to be poor, it's hard to be rich. And that's what we have to focus on. So that's my message to you about the naval industry. Another point, just to finish and head to our party, we do have a problem with words in Brazil, and one of them is the future. When we're talking about the future, is hit the brakes, really, because it's the future. So I think we should abolish the word future, because here in Brazil we need things for yesterday, really. 2050, I don't really understand. What am I doing here today? Tomorrow's a holiday. 2050, really? Nothing's going to happen in 2050 if we don't start working right now. So this planning ability is fundamental, and admitting that no one knows everything and no one can get to the podium thinking they're the only winners. Everyone has to know what to do. Everyone have to feel victorious. That's my final message. This group of crew that we have here, everyone is a winner, regardless of where they're from or what operation. It's just like a surgery, really. If the doctor asks for an instrument and doesn't get it, the surgery will stop. Really? So so these interaction perceptions are very strong and must be remembered. Like the representative of Suzano, these examples for victory. I come from the interior side of São Paulo, and those that see Suzano as a paper producer, right? All of the countries in the world let Suzano get into their market, but that wasn't easy for them, and we have the capacity. We are not. We are very strong. We have drilled petroleum 7 kilometers of depth. We are the few countries of the world that builds airplanes, aircrafts, and ships and submarines. Without mentioning that is one of the few countries in the world that has a soccer team that is a penta champion. Thank you very much. Well, I greet you all. It is now 5:37, and we finish this event. Thank you for these 2 days with us, and you are all invited for our party. Have a safe trip back home and rest tomorrow during the holiday.